What's up guys? Today we're gonna find out just how strong Augusta is for free-to-play players, with and without Mortefi since he's not in the banner. So here's my build for CGO Augusta, using the standard 5-star weapons as always, the lustrous razor. By the way, if you happen to own GN's signature weapon, you're truly in luck, as it's actually perfectly compatible with Augusta, which is something very rare in this game. It's barely any weaker than her own signature, about 10% at most, so if you got it, you can totally skip Augusta's weapon and save your pulls for what's ahead, especially now in the second half of the patch. Now when it comes to the Echo sets, obviously we're going with the latest edition, the Crown of Valor, which once again comes as a 3-piece set, so you're free to choose either Void Thunder or Lingering Tunes for the rest, which both are pretty much the same in terms of damage. On a side note, it looks like this 3-piece design is going to be the standard for future Echo sets, so I personally recommend farming for Lingering Tunes, so the cost 3 echoes of other elemental damage can be saved for the future characters, giving you more chance to roll for better substats. Now in terms of 4-tab priorities, focus on upgrading her basic attack, circle and liberation first, then followed by her skill, and finally her intro skills, which honestly isn't worth upgrading at all, unless you have got plenty of spare resources. Alright, now onto her mechanic and gameplay. Once again, despite the long essays, she's actually quite tricky to play. Yep, you heard that right, she's not quite the usual brain dead character to play, and you'll see why in a moment. Now first thing first, that super cool ultimate we have all seen countless times does not require any energy, but instead requires 2 stacks of these to activate. The first one's easy, you gain it just by staying out of combat for 4 seconds, which is perfect for starting any fights. The second one, however, needs some foreplay just like everybody else, which isn't exactly easy and straightforward, and will cost you a lot of time if you don't know what to do. In order to acquire the stack, she has to fill out the central circle to full, which is done by using her skill and spamming basic attack and heavy attack. But as you can tell, this process is painfully slow. So to speed things up, we'll have to use her intro along with the alternative liberation that consumes energy. Together, they fill out 60% of the circle, significantly cutting down the foreplay time. Once it's full, sponge your skill button 3 times and finally you gain the stack. Quite the hassle just for 1 stack, right? And since you need her alternative liberation for every rotation, you'll have to build at least 130% energy regen, otherwise she'll be very clunky to play from my experience. Now on the other hand, here's another really important thing you have to know, so pay close attention. In longer battles where you can't just leave the combat for stats, you'll have to rely on her outro instead, and that's where things get very tricky, as one single mistake can ruin your entire rotation. Seriously. In short, Augusta doesn't gain the stack right away when triggering the outro. Instead, she only gets it when the affected characters performs their own outro. Take this footage for example. When I trigger Augusta's outro to Shorekeeper, nothing happens yet. It's only after Shorekeeper does her own outro that Augusta finally gets the stack she needs. And here comes the big trap. If you switch characters too early without triggering the outro, Augusta's outro effect gets cancelled completely. So of the worst, even if you realize and switch back to trigger it, it won't work. And just like that, you lose the chance to gain the stack completely, breaking your entire rotation, forcing you to do the foreplay twice just to come back. So basically, in other words, Augusta heavily punishes any form of quick swapping. You must follow a strict team order and rotation, and if you accidentally swap out at the wrong time or onto the wrong character, you lose the stat she needs for the ultimate, which costs you precious time trying to regain it. Though to be fair, it's also fairly straightforward to play in a sense, since it doesn't require any skill to play. Just stick to the right order and rotation, and you're all set. But personally, I'm not too fond of this design, because quick swap has always been one of the most fun parts of the game for me. Besides, this feels especially painful with Mortefi, since his auto recharge isn't exactly great if you're unable to quick swap. Anyway, that's about everything you have to know for Augusta's gameplay. The one last thing for you to know, her ultimate doesn't just freeze enemies, it literally stops time. Everything is frozen while it's active. Enemies, teammates, all kinds of off-field skills, and even buff durations are paused. So basically in practice, it works more like a big nuke that lasts for 7 seconds. Now when it comes to her team building, since Augusta doesn't have any self-healing of her own, and her shield is pretty much non-existent, you'll always have to bring a healer. So once again, it's overtime for Verena and Showkeeper. The final slot goes to your damage buffer as usual, in which she only has 3 choices to work with. The most free-to-play friendly option is definitely Mortefi, who's probably the strongest among them as well. A C6 Mortefi with static mace actually gives you 30% attack and 50% damage bonus, while also putting off some solid off-field damage if you build him properly like mine. So yeah, no reason to pick anyone else over him, especially if you're free to play. But unfortunately, he's not on Augusta's banner for some reason, so if you don't have him, well, there's not much you can do. Either hope to get him randomly, or wait and pull in the next half if you can afford it. Or just play her with Verena as a duo as a last resort, which is actually surprisingly viable. Alright, finally it's time to dive into the team showcase. Given that Augusta really only has one reliable free-to-play team with Mortefi, I'll be showcasing this team in more details. So let's start with the DPS check in the Tower of Adversity, and from my experience so far, I would say it's actually pretty darn strong, possibly one of the best in the game. And to make sure it's not because of my broken Mortefi, I even chose the chamber full of fusion resistance to minimize its damage. And guess what? Augusta still had a pretty easy time clearing it, so damage wise there's nothing to be afraid of. She is definitely one of the best in the game, even though it doesn't seem that way since her Nuke damage is far lower than the others. As for the WutheringWaves, she's actually pretty solid too. One big advantage goes to her time stop, which is extremely useful in this mode, as enemies will still spawn even though time is frozen. And that's something extremely valuable, and no other character has it. Honestly, it feels almost identical to using the gadget exploit, only this time around, it's official and legit. Another advantage is her synergy with one of the best tokens in this mode, the Plunderer's Captain Seal. So even if the gold token stops favoring her in the future, she'll still remain solid in this mode. Alright, now just before moving on to the conclusion, let's take a quick look at Augusta without Mortefi. The best team you can go for is the double healer team, which actually turns out to be on par with Mortefi. Honestly, I didn't expect this until I tried it out, but since it takes away 2 valuable healers, it's a problem for players with small roster, especially now that the Tower of Adversity has 2 extra floors. If that's the case, you're honestly better off just running 2 units, which surprisingly is just slightly weaker than her full team. As you see, I actually managed to clear the left 4 in time, which tells you how strong of a DPS Augusta is. So finally we have come to the conclusion. To wrap things up, Augusta is a solid all-round DPS for free-to-play players. Although Mortefi is her best teammate, she's actually strong enough to be fine even without him. That said, having Mortefi definitely makes her a lot stronger, turning it into one of the best teams in the game. So if you're hesitating because of not having enough pulls to pull together, well, you can rest assured now, as she is perfectly viable with Mortefi. Anyway, that's about everything for this video. If you found this helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments how you feel about Augusta. Thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.